In Ethiopia's Afar Rift, archaeologists uncovered a 100,000-year-old collection of Homo sapiens bones bearing the distinct charred signature of extreme high-temperature burning. The remains also carry deep bite marks from large predators, and the surrounding geological layers indicate that they were completely swallowed by the earth in a sudden, violent burial. Most of our knowledge regarding early human behavior comes from cave deposits. Over tens of thousands of years, the dirt inside those enclosed spaces gets compressed down, mixing ancient tools with much newer animal bones, and making it difficult to establish a precise timeline. But these specific remains were excavated from the Dawatoli Formation. It is a rare, open-air site where the chronological layers of soil have sat entirely undisturbed. Because there was no subsequent water flow or geological shifting to scramble the site, researchers found the exact spatial relationships between the fossils and surrounding objects locked in place over a massive area. This preservation turns a scattering of ancient bones into a high-resolution map of early human behavior. Looking closely at the charring on the bones, the damage points to temperatures far hotter than a fast-moving natural wildfire could physically produce. Researchers hypothesize that this intense burning indicates intentional human cremation. If true, it represents the earliest known evidence for this practice. Strewn throughout the immediate undisturbed vicinity are thousands of stone artifacts, many found exactly where they were dropped 100,000 centuries ago. Many of these tools are carved from obsidian, a dark volcanic glass. Geologically, obsidian does not form in this specific section of the Rift Valley. Acquiring this specialized material required early humans to mount deliberate expeditions to distant volcanic regions and carry it back. The evidence points to a highly mobile population, capable of coordinating long-range resource gathering alongside specialized sanitary or religious funerary rites. These humans were sharing the landscape with a massive biological network. Excavators recovered a cache of over 3,000 animal fossils alongside the tools and remains. The site is packed with the bones of monkeys, rodents, and large mammals, confirming a fiercely competitive ecosystem. Living alongside these animals explains the predator bite marks found on the human skeletons. This was a dangerous environment to navigate. The landscape was also physically volatile. The evidence of sudden burial points to the ancient Awash River and its violent seasonal flood cycles. This map shows distinct clusters of tool distributions across the ancient floodplain. Despite the threat of predators and flash floods, humans repeatedly chose to return to this flood-prone area. Because the soil layers are intact, the distribution confirms they built no permanent settlements. They timed their visits, moving in and out as the river swelled and receded. This floodplain served as a strategic node for seasonal hunting and gathering within a vast managed territory. The prevailing scientific assumption has been that slow-moving global climate fluctuations were the main catalysts forcing early humans to adapt and change their behavior. But researcher Farhat Kaya and his team draw a different conclusion from the Dawatoli Formation. Their findings suggest that local hydrological factors, specifically the flood cycles of the river, shaped daily human life and migration more than global climate shifts. While global climate changes occur over thousands of years, surviving a river that floods every spring requires rapid behavioral flexibility and constant ingenuity. These 100,000-year-old remains show that our ancestors had already mastered the logistical and social complexity required to thrive in a volatile local ecosystem.
Humans have a tendency to look for the minimum effective dose. We rely on scientific guidelines to establish a comfortable baseline, a point where we can satisfy the requirements for survival and safety without unnecessary effort. In modern health, that baseline is 150 minutes of weekly exercise. It is a universally accepted standard that defines what it means to be active enough. We apply this same logic to the prehistoric world. We look at the Tyrannosaurus rex and assume its small arms were an evolutionary quirk, a minor detail in an animal that was already surviving well enough. But recent findings across cardiology and paleontology indicate that these thresholds are insufficient. The data reveals that staying alive, whether as a modern human or an apex predator, requires a biological investment far beyond these convenient baselines. A study from Macau Polytechnic University analyzed data from 17,000 participants in the UK Biobank. Researchers used wrist-worn devices to track the actual exercise habits of these individuals over nearly 8 years. This chart shows the results for those who met the standard 150-minute guideline. The risk reduction for cardiovascular events was only 8 to 9%, a modest margin of safety for the effort involved. To achieve optimal risk reduction, the exercise volume has to be substantially higher. The data indicates that the real threshold for cardiovascular defense is between 560 and 610 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity per week. That is roughly 10 hours of physical exertion every week. It requires restructuring a typical life to find blocks of time that most people currently reserve for work or rest. Achieving optimal health isn't a matter of hitting a low minimum. It requires a significant trade-off in how we spend our time. We see this same demand for high investment in the deep past. A recent study of 82 theropod species by researchers at University College London and Cambridge shows how survival is written into bone. The researchers found a direct link between the shortening of forelimbs and the expansion of the skull. As these predators evolved, their arms shrank in proportion to their heads growing larger and more powerful. Hunting 100-foot-long sauropods made claws a secondary tool. Evolution redirected biological energy away from the arms and into the massive jaw strength needed to hold and kill gigantic prey. Eventually, the head replaced the arms as the primary weapon. The skull became the specialized tool required to maintain its status as an apex predator. These reduced limbs represent a biological trade-off, a redirection of energy toward the massive bite force required to survive in an environment of giants. This pressure to meet extreme baselines extended into the Cretaceous oceans. A fossil excavation in northern Texas recently uncovered a gargantuan marine reptile. Researchers identified this as a new species, Tylosaurus rex. At 43 feet in length, it is more than twice the size of a large great white shark. The skeleton reveals a predator designed for the deep, with a massive frame and rows of teeth built to swallow prey whole. But the fossils also show evidence of extreme behavior. These specimens display a level of violence against their own species that is not seen in other marine reptiles. In the Cretaceous seas, simply being large was not enough. Dominance required a behavioral baseline of constant, high-level aggression. From the way we protect our hearts to the way dinosaurs grew their skulls, the evidence points toward a difficult reality about survival. We often aim for a minimal safety margin, but the natural world functions on a different scale. We've seen the cost of these higher thresholds: 10 hours of weekly physical effort, loss of limbs for jaw power, and a life of constant competition. History and biology suggest that survival is not found at the low end of the scale. It requires an investment far beyond our comfortable minimums. This blurry, glowing orange ring is what we usually picture when we think of a black hole. We understand these massive objects as the astronomical remnants of dying stars, formed in spectacular cosmic collapses. But according to the theory of relativity, these objects don't actually have to be stellar giants. The physics allows for microscopic black holes to emerge from specific, highly organized conditions we call critical states. Think about water at 0 degrees Celsius. A microscopic drop in temperature causes chaotic molecules to spontaneously snap into a rigid, regular pattern, an ice crystal. Similarly, the curvature of space and time can lock into a rigid, repeating pattern, a space-time crystal. But add a tiny sliver of energy, and the unstable structure shatters, rapidly collapsing inward into a dense, microscopic black hole. This reveals an inherent instability in the vacuum of space. Under the exact right conditions, invisible, microscopic black holes could form from the self-organization of space-time itself. Physicists have suspected this process was possible for decades. Back in 1993, researchers running computer simulations watched these spontaneous space-time crystals form and collapse on their screens. Yet, for the next 30 years, nobody could prove the computers were right. Human researchers tried to describe the process mathematically and derive the exact formulas, but the simulations remained unsupported by analytical proof. This photograph of Albert Einstein reminds us of the immense intellectual weight of his equations. In our universe of 3 spatial dimensions and 1 dimension of time, the math required to track gravity and space-time curvature
is so tangled that solving it exactly for a chaotic critical state is nearly impossible. When you try to track all those interacting, multivariable states with just a pen and paper, the calculations quickly outgrow any human capacity to solve them. Confirming these structures required an analytical solution that did not seem to exist within the standard four-dimensional framework of our reality. A research team from Frankfurt and Vienna moved past the standard 4D approach, adopting a methodology that bypassed the traditional dimensions of relativity. They reasoned that nothing in the actual equations explicitly restricts them to 4 dimensions. You can write them for 5 or 42. So they decided to calculate the collapse for a universe with an infinite number of dimensions. As we watch this generated video of abstract geometric spaces folding inward, we can imagine what scaling up to infinity looks like. You are stacking an endless number of overlapping dimensions on top of each other. This diagram shows a counterintuitive mathematical rule taking over. When you push these equations to the absolute limit of infinity, the interacting variables start to cancel each other out, and the chaos smoothly resolves into a single, elegant line. By abandoning the physical constraints of the reality we live in, an impossibly complex calculation suddenly became cleanly solvable. Operating entirely inside this infinite dimensional sandbox, the researchers were finally able to put away the supercomputers and work strictly with paper and pencil. Here we see an animated representation of their success. As this perfect geometric lattice draws itself on screen, it illustrates the exact rules for how space-time freezes. It pinpoints the minimum energy threshold required to destabilize the system, forcing the crystal to collapse inward into a dense singularity. They successfully mapped the spontaneous birth of a black hole using pure mathematics. The only problem was their victory was currently trapped in a universe that doesn't actually exist. The final hurdle was taking this pristine, infinite-dimensional solution and dragging it back down into our messy, four-dimensional reality. To bridge that gap, the team utilized advanced approximation methods. These techniques allowed them to take the exact infinite answer and systematically step it down, dimension by dimension. If we look at this generated animation of a shifting multi-dimensional shape sharply clicking down into a standard cube, you can see it in action. They carefully stripped away the extra mathematical variables until they were left with recognizable four-dimensional physics. When they finished the translation, the pen and paper equations perfectly matched the results of those original 1993 computer simulations. Now, physicists have a stable analytical tool to explore the extremely early universe. They can use these formulas to hunt for primordial black holes, microscopic objects that likely formed in the chaotic, energy-dense soup right after the Big Bang. Sometimes, cracking the most complicated, deeply hidden mechanics of our physical universe requires us to stop looking at it directly and step entirely outside of it.
When we think of black holes, we usually picture the catastrophic death of a massive star collapsing under its own immense gravity. But physics also allows for black holes that are microscopic, objects compressed down to a fraction of a millimeter. These miniature anomalies don't require spectacular cosmic explosions. Instead, they can emerge from highly precarious physical systems, where adding even the slightest sliver of energy pushes the entire structure over the edge. Physicists call the exact moment this phase change occurs critical collapse. It is the precise threshold where standard space-time organization breaks down and a micro-black hole is born. Mapping this exact razor-thin boundary of critical instability is the true challenge of this research, far more than the raw scale of the objects themselves. We have known these objects were theoretically possible for decades. Back in 1993, early computer simulations showed that microscopic black holes could indeed form spontaneously through this process of critical collapse. But confirming those computer models with rigorous mathematics proved immensely difficult. For 30 years, researchers tried and failed to write down the exact equations describing how this happens. The problem lies in our reality. Tracking the interactions of mass, energy, and gravity in our standard four-dimensional universe creates a web of variables so tangled that they are virtually impossible to solve by hand. Recently, a joint team of physicists from the Vienna University of Technology and Goethe University Frankfurt decided to attack this long-standing mathematical wall.
They realized that to solve a problem bound by the physical constraints of 4 dimensions, they had to stop doing math in our universe entirely. The team proposed an unusual workaround. If the equations for space and time are too messy in 4 dimensions, they asked what would happen if those same equations were scaled up to 5, 42, or even infinitely many dimensions. Common sense suggests infinite variables make math harder, but at the extreme limit, chaos irons itself out. Stretching physical equations to infinite scale cancels out competing forces. The intractable web dissolves, replaced by perfectly clean formulas solvable with paper and pencil. Pushing the problem to its absolute limit, the physicists discovered a structural shortcut resolving the complexity. With these new equations, they could finally map exactly what is happening during this process. Under Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, whenever particles move from one place to another, their mass and energy bend space and time itself. Under the right conditions, those curves don't stay random. Just as freezing liquid water forces moving molecules into the rigid geometry of ice, space-time curvature can spontaneously organize into a regular, repeating pattern. The researchers refer to this emerging structure as a space-time crystal. It is a delicate intermediate state. If the energy of the system drops, the structure dissolves safely into ordinary space-time. But if you add even a microscopic fraction of energy, the regular geometry shatters in a critical collapse, instantly compressing into a tiny black hole. Decades after computers first hinted at the possibility, the infinite dimensional math provided the exact physical mechanism, detailing how space and time can crystallize and subsequently collapse. Of course, equations derived in an infinitely dimensional universe are only useful if they describe reality. The final step was to bring those findings back home. Because the mathematical foundation was now completely clean, the team developed approximation methods to systematically step the formulas backward, dialing the dimensions down one by one until they reached 4. This gives physicists an entirely new analytical tool. Instead of relying heavily on massive computer simulations, they can study black hole phenomena mathematically on paper. The 30-year theoretical roadblock was cleared by proving that sometimes the fastest way to solve a physical problem is to briefly leave our universe behind. Critical collapse likely governed the moments after the Big Bang, when the entire universe was a chaotic, hyperdense fluid of particles shifting at microscopic scales. In that extreme environment, these critical states were constantly forming and shattering, the perfect conditions for space-time crystals to continually organize and collapse, birthing millions of primordial black holes. To uncover how these microscopic anomalies might have seeded the early universe, physicists had to stop looking smaller and start calculating the infinite. Plants generate their energy using sunlight. Animals, lacking that cellular machinery, have to consume other matter to survive. There is exactly one known exception in nature, the sacoglossan sea slug. When this slug eats algae, it doesn't fully digest the meal. Instead, it extracts the chloroplasts, the microscopic engines responsible for photosynthesis, and stores them inside its own intestinal cells. If food runs out, the slug simply lives off the sun. If a sea slug can bypass biological rules to harvest light, could human cells be engineered to do the exact same thing to cure our own internal crises? Dry eye disease affects over 1.5 billion people worldwide, causing chronic pain, blurred vision, and corneal scarring. At the cellular level, a death spiral begins. Corneal inflammation generates reactive oxygen species, or ROS, aggressive molecules that rapidly damage cells. Healthy eyes neutralize ROS using the antioxidant NADPH. But in inflamed eyes, multiplying ROS completely exhaust this NADPH supply, leaving the tissue defenseless. Current blockbuster treatments like Restasis target the inflammation pathways. However, they fail entirely to replace the lost NADPH, leaving the underlying cellular energy deficit unresolved. Managing symptoms is just a losing strategy. To permanently heal the tissue, the eye requires an independent, localized generator to continuously produce its own antioxidants. The human eye and a plant leaf share a rare physiological trait. They are both anatomically structured to absorb visible light. Researchers at the National University of Singapore realized they could exploit this shared trait, finding their starting material in ordinary spinach leaves. Deep inside plant cells, thylakoid grana convert light into NADPH. Using a patented process, researchers stripped away energy-consuming parts, isolating the photosynthetic engine. The result is LEAF, a nano-sized factory producing 20% more healing NADPH than natural plant cells. They systematically dismantled a plant down to its core mechanics, extracting the exact biological engine human cells desperately need to survive. Delivering this hardware is incredibly simple. The LEAF nanoparticles are suspended in standard liquid eye drops and applied directly to the cornea. Once absorbed, ordinary ambient light entering the patient's eye instantly powers up the dormant nanoparticles inside the living corneal cells. Within 30 minutes of light exposure, the cell's critical NADPH defense levels are fully restored, halting further oxidative damage. In preclinical trials, these drops reversed severe corneal tissue damage to near healthy levels in just 5 days, outperforming existing pharmaceutical drugs. The human eye literally uses the ambient light of its environment to autonomously manufacture its own cure, bypassing the body's failing biology entirely. Science has produced an inexpensive, non-invasive, vegetable-derived treatment for a multi-billion-dollar global disease, powered entirely by the physical act of sight. The NUS team has integrated functional plant-derived photosynthetic hardware directly into the living cells of a typical mammalian eye. The cellular exhaustion causing dry eye disease, oxidative stress, underpins a massive range of inflammatory conditions throughout the entire human body. The immediate next targets for this breakthrough are other tissues naturally accessible to light, including the retina, the skin, and underlying skeletal muscles. By transplanting the molecular engines of plants into human tissue, we now possess a limited form of photosynthesis, hacking the ambient light around us to heal ourselves from the inside out.